All right, well, once again, we talk to the leaders in sports, business, and entertainment and how we can all get better and learn from one another's journeys. And speaking of which, this man's journey was very unique, to say the least. You can see on the screen there, he's a Fremantle fan, but what is a little bit unique, I know he's given the colours a very good plug. It's very unique that he actually was born in New York. He's a Mets fan, which we've actually just had a discussion about that off air. Lives in San Francisco, teaches in year 11. He's a writer. As we said, amazingly, he's a Fremantle fan. He's written a book on the AFL called Jumping at the Chance, and I've got to take exception to something in there written about me, by the way. There it is, gratuitous plug. And I think out of everything, Gil, the biggest compliment I can give you is that Martin Flanagan has given you the compliment. And in any Aussie, as any Aussie knows, you've got the gold standard that he said that you're a good bloke. So you don't come any recommendation that you've got the gold standard from Martin Flanagan. How are you going, mate?
Going okay, holding up as well as I can in these really troubled times. I have had a lot of sleepless nights over the past 10 days, a lot of tension, headaches, just trying to hold it together as this country is really having a moment of reckoning.
Yeah, it is, mate. Look, we'll definitely have a chat about that, but it's what led me. I think I sort of found you on Twitter. I think you come across on my Twitter feed. But all of a sudden, I'd seen an American that was so passionate about Australian rules football, but of all, Fremantle. Like, how did you end up initially following Australian rules football?
Well, that happened in the 80s when I was a teenager, when ESPN was just starting and they needed programming to fill up their 24 hours. And we'd get all kinds of sports from all over the globe. And so one very late night, I was staying up in New York at my dad's apartment, and I thought I was hallucinating at what I saw because there was a big green ground and with stands, but the athletes I saw were wearing uniforms that looked like basketball uniforms. They were chasing around a football that didn't look like an American one. I saw the goalpost there that had no crossbar. And the strangest thing I might have seen were these guys wearing lab coats and white hats that were running around pointing, and I didn't know what that was all about. And then toilet paper streamed from the stands anytime the ball went through the goalpost. But I was fascinated, and I never, ever lost the visuals on that and just kept it up.
Geez, we wouldn't have minded some of that toilet paper recently, would we?
Yeah, right.
and look, I think ever since then, yeah. So it was on ESPN, and then was it actually your girlfriend of all teams? You ended up she barracked for Collingwood, didn't she? And it was through watching the 1990 grand final that's what got you into the footy.
Yeah, actually, it was a female friend of mine that I met in a yoga class, and she and her boyfriend came over one night because she had heard I told her I was going down to Australia and that I was going to go see an AFL match. And so she brings over this videotape, shows how old this was, a videotape of the 1990 grand final, which turned out to be the first footy match that I watched from beginning to end. So I remember that big fight at halftime, and I remember she told me about the Collie-Wobble's name and all of that. So she's really getting me into the tradition. And so by the time I went, I was really wrapped. And one thing I'm really proud of to this day is the first match I ever saw was at the SCG, where Sydney played Port Adelaide, and it also happened to be Adam Goodes' debut. So I can now say that Goodsy and I made our AFL debuts in the same round.
On the same day. Well,
yes.
between you, you've won a few Brownlow medals between the two of you.
Yeah, I'd say so. We banked some Brownlow votes.
And then and then footy also, or I suppose Australian rules football also did you another favour, because that's how you did eventually meet your now wife. Is that correct?
It was, well, it's not how I met her, but it was definitely, I guess these days we'd call it a recruiting tool. So one of the things that happened was when we started dating, she's a big sports fan. And some of our first dates were watching footy matches on the channel that was then called Fox Sports World. But she had a little different path to her club because she fell immediately in love with the Sydney Swans. And so she bleeds red and white. She's a Swans girl through and through.
Yeah, and then that obviously led to a bit of angst. That was before one of the final series. You were telling me that was it Fremantle were obviously playing Sydney, and then you then went and watched it in separate houses, didn't you?
That's right. This is 2013, and I have another mate whose birthday is mine. And by the way, our birthdays, Corey, are only a week apart because I'm December 12th, you're December 19th. So we're both Sagittarians. So
You are very correct.
yeah, that's right. So anyway, another mate of mine who was from Miling in the Wheat Belt in West Australia, he and I we had met each other and we agreed that we were going to watch over at his place. And this time, my wife and I were living in LA, and it's about a 40-minute drive to his house. So I headed down there because I just thought there is no way that we're going to be able to watch in the same house, because earlier that season, Fremantle played Sydney at the SCG, and it ended up being the first draw in Freo's history. So I was thinking, there's no way, I'm not even going to tolerate somebody barracking against my club in our biggest moment. So we drove to his place, and the match started at 2:40 in the morning. And we're doing all we can to keep our voices down, not to scream and yell, because his family is sleeping in the other room, right?
Yeah.
And I also had booked a ticket to go to Australia, to go to Melbourne and see the grand final. I booked that about a month out. So if we were going to go regardless, but for me, it just had to be that we were going to get this done. And so the funniest thing was in the dying moments, when it was apparent what was going to happen, my wife sends me this text. And if anyone else had read it and didn't know the context, they would really find it the strangest thing. But she texts, "Congratulations." Or no, she texts, "My heart is broken in a million pieces. Congratulations."
And what was I'll slowly get to the journey that was yours about going to the AFL Grand Final. But I know that you'd had other visits to Australia. How good was it coming to a game? I know you tell a great story about, I think you went to Sandringham. Now, for those that are out there, Sandringham is probably about 30 or 40 minutes, or probably about half an hour from the city of Melbourne. Bayside suburb in Melbourne, real great suburb, and they've got a suburban football ground there. But just tell everyone, I know you had a great story about the fact that, how accessible the Australian rules football stars are compared to the guys in the US.
Yeah, it's incredible, because I went to Sandringham to see Jason Holmes play, because Holmesy was trying to work his way onto the Saints list. And so I figured I'd go down and see him. And the funny thing is, I'm yelling out from behind the fence, and everybody hears my American accent, and all the eyes go on me. And then the other thing is, too, since I'm older than Jason, people wondered if I was his dad. And and so I'm watching him play and really enjoying that. And then at quarter time, I could not believe what I saw. The fact that the fans can go be part of the huddle where the senior coach is talking to the players. I've never seen anything like that. It was like this. It was kind of medieval. Like you get this idea of this medieval village and people coming to hear what the mayor is saying or something. So I think that was really fascinating. And then also during the match at halftime, Bob Murphy is over there because the match was against the Western Bulldogs, and so Murph just comes over, and Brett Goods was there, and Jake Stringer was there, and Jason Johannesson was there, and I'm just chatting away to him, just introducing myself, having this casual conversation with all of them. And you'd never see that in the United States. I don't think there's ever been a time in the U.S. With baseball or any other sport where the players are so accessible. Yeah. I had the same thing when I saw a match when I went to see Mason Cox play when he was in the Collingwood Twos and over at Victoria Park. And Scotty Pendlebury is right over there, and we just start chatting away. So it's crazy the way that works.
I think those people out there, I don't think, I think you've worked out now that Gil seriously knows his stuff and can hold his own. It's not just an American who loves our game. You can just see by the way he's rattled off all those names. He seriously knows his stuff. So, and when was the first time you did the pilgrimage to actual Fremantle itself? When did you first do that?
Well, I did the pilgrimage to Fremantle for the first time in 2015. And I had actually been over there in the year 2000. And it was interesting because I went to the Freo Club store in 2000, and it was a few weeks after the Demolition Derby happened. And I remember the store was playing the vision of that big brawl, that famous brawl. And then later I ended up meeting Sean McManus and meeting Pav and some of the other combatants in there. But 2015 is when I first went over. And I was going over to do some work on the book. And so the whole point was to go over and see Mason and Jason play in Melbourne. But I wanted to start by going to Freo to pay homage, go to the home ground. And it was a lot like you read a book and then you see the movie. And it was really like that. And when I went there, it was a Thursday night match against Collingwood. And we ended up winning that match. And you're not going to believe this, but 30 seconds into the match, Sonny Walters snaps one off his opposite right boot, and it landed a few rows in front of me because I was actually in the cheer section. And I had never had that experience before, being in the cheer section. And I wanted to get the full experience. So I took the train I stayed in Freo, went to training, took the train into Subiaco. Mick Barlow actually drove me around Fremantle, introduced me to a whole bunch of people. And it was just fantastic. I couldn't believe, how great the fans were and the players. And I even met Roscoe out there.
I think, is it probably safe to say that the closest thing in America to Australian rules football with that, nearly that sort of family type feel, is it probably more like college football in some regards? Like, even though you've got the professionalism of Australian rules football, but it nearly has that feel. And I'm not saying from an NFL point of view and the NBA and organisations like that, but it nearly seems like the parallels between between college football and Australian rules, they're very similar.
It could be, but I think Aussie rules is completely unique. The college atmosphere I can get a little bit, but it's not. I think in U.S. college football, you're competing with this whole network of alumni people and of boosters and of hundreds of thousands of fans that have been there for generations. I don't think there really is anything that compares to Aussie rules as far as that bond that the fans have with their club, and the fact that there's so many uniquely cultural things. I mean, the supporters making the crepe paper banner for the players to run through, going to see the twos and having the community training. I mean, one of the things that I loved about Fremantle and really understood that is a little bit different to now, because the training is done at the new headquarters. But to get the full experience, I went with a few guys. We went to get a vanilla slice at a cafe, and we headed down to Fremantle Oval. Everybody's watching. We're all, have a cappuccino and the whole thing. And it's just totally different the way that the community is so connected with the club. And I could see that replicated in Fremantle, the way that, Arden Street for North, because I've been to Arden Street, and I met Majak Daw and Scotty and Eric Wallace over there, and Boomer Harvey. And it was really cool to see that, the fact that something that's so different from American sporting clubs is that the clubs themselves are community centers. And it's hard to explain that to Americans about how, there are pokies in places, as you know, and then there's a community center, and there's a basketball court, and maybe there's a netball association with it. And so I think it's completely unique.
And what's, even to this day, what is still the craziest custom about Australian rules football? I know you mentioned goal umpires, whether it's anything about them. What is still something to this day that maybe that you still shake your head at, but then probably what's further to that, what's still the one that every American shakes their head at about our game?
Well, I could think the one thing that you can't control that I shake my head at is the numbers of seagulls that are out on the ground at the MCG. And it's almost as if they're part of the action. But also, I would probably have to say the runners. And of course, the AFL has limited that now. But back in the day, when you had runners all over the place and, nearly getting involved in the play, a lot of my friends would wonder, well, hey, what's that person doing on the field? Why is someone not in uniform that's on the field? So that's something that I really enjoy. And it's not something that I shake my head at, but something I really embrace as something unique. The other thing that I really love about Aussie rules that I hope never ever gets Americanized, I love the fact that the players don't wear surnames on the backs of their jumpers, because as a fan, that forces me to have to invest and to have to really get to know who all the players are. And, Matthew Pavlich never needed number 29 on his back, never needed Pavlich on his back to know who he was. My favorite Docker, Hayden Ballantyne, when he was around, everyone knew he was number one. There's no reason to put his surname on the back. And I think it's a very interesting cultural difference, because in American sport, everything is so individualized. But in Australia, it's the team first. It's the club first. And that's really the important thing. So on all my jumpers that I have, I would never put a surname on the back. And I think that the number is enough.
Yeah. And then you had your journey, was that to the grand final when Fremantle, was it Fremantle, you played Hawthorn, didn't you?
Yeah, you had to bring that up.
Yeah. No, well, the reason, look, I think it's a fascinating story, because it's not only the fact that you attended the grand final and you got to see your team play, but after we had that conversation, don't rub it in that you're having a beer and I'm not.
Okay.
But I think it's a fantastic, or it's not a fantastic story. It's the story that you told me the other day about going to the grand final, but then what you told me afterwards in terms of what you had to deal with when you get home is an amazing story.
Yeah. Wow. That was really incredible, because a few weeks after I got back from the grand final, my wife and I had just come home from the movies. And just to put this in a little context, and I guess to laugh to keep from crying, the movie that we saw was 12 Years a Slave. And it's about an African-American named Solomon Northup, who lived in upstate New York. And he was duped into joining a theatrical troupe. And the troupe went to Washington, D.C., and he was abducted and captured and sold into slavery, and was 12 years away from his family before finally a white ally met him and campaigned for his release. So imagine that you're coming home from that movie. You go to your mailbox on a Friday night. I open the mail, and I get a letter from the Torrance, California Police Department saying that there's a warrant out for my arrest. And at first I thought it was a practical joke. I really looked carefully at the stationery to see that this was real. Because, I have never been arrested in my life. I don't have any kind of criminal record. And at that time, I was teaching at an elite private high school in Los Angeles. And it didn't list a charge. It didn't list any offense. And I remember I had gotten a speeding ticket a while back, but I hadn't been in Torrance in a year. So I go inside, and naturally, at this point, I'm shaking. I'm nervous, thinking, what in the world's going on? And I call the police department, and I ask what it's all about. And the desk sergeant there said, well, if you come down, I'm sure we can explain it to you. And, having just seen 12 Years a Slave and about abduction, I'm thinking there is no way I'm going down there. No way I'm going alone, not without legal representation. There's just no way I'm doing it. So I lawyer up, and my attorney finds out. He gets a copy of the arrest warrant and the criminal complaint. The charge was aggravated assault and robbery, or whatever it was they were calling it. So in the criminal complaint that I'm reading that a suspect in this case, and forgive me because I don't know the metric system well enough to know the conversion. So I'm gonna have to go as Bruce McAvaney would say in the old. 6'4", the suspect was 6'4" tall, weighed 240 pounds, and was either African-American or Filipino. Now, just looking at my driver license, which they had access to, and they can see my picture, they can see that I am listed as African-American, that I am 6'1", and that I weigh about 180 pounds. As far as the Filipino part goes, I've never been mistaken for it. Now, my wife is, and my nephews are, but I am not. So anyway, I come to find out reading the criminal report that allegedly this incident took place at a convenience store where a can of motor oil was stolen, and someone took his fist, the suspect took his fist and put a key in here and in between the knuckles. And I had never even heard of anybody doing that before, and assaulting a gentleman there with that. And I looked and I saw the date of this alleged incident. And the day of the alleged incident, I had to laugh at it, because at this time when this happened, I was on an airplane I was on Air New Zealand Flight 6 from Melbourne to Auckland to Los Angeles. And I'm thinking, you know what, either I have the longest arms in the world that can reach down from 40,000 feet out of US airspace into some a convenience store and perpetrate this. And I just was flabbergasted by this, thinking, first of all, I couldn't possibly have done it. Second, if you think about motive, you tell me, Corey, I mean, does this make any sense? Somebody in his late 40s who teaches at a private high school, who has 2 Ivy League degrees, who has been a professional journalist for decades and has no criminal record, suddenly that person is going to start a criminal career at age 46 or whatever I was, and they're going to do it, and they're going to start by stealing a can of motor oil and assaulting a store clerk? I mean, does that make any sense at all?
And the kicker, and yeah, as we just discussed, you were actually on your way back home from the grand final, weren't you?
Yes, exactly. That was on the Sunday. That was the day after the grand final. And, so here's coming home from a really, really happy event, except for, of course.
Except for the result.
Yeah, and I have to say, my wife and I were in the second row behind. We were second row, and we were in the city end, and opposite the punt road end, and we were very close to the behind post that poor Nat Fife scraped and once and missed another time. But yeah, I mean, so anyway, it was a fantastic trip. The only disappointment out of the whole thing was the result. I had every confidence and reason to believe we'd be back the next year, and then the next year. Well, that didn't happen. But so anyway, it was a thrilling trip, and it should have been, that vibe should have continued. And then to get a letter like that, and the worst part is that even though I had a mountain of evidence, I mean, the air ticket, the passenger manifest, I had to call Air New Zealand and get an official letter. I had all these kinds of things to prove that there is no way I could have even been near that place. Is that case dragged on for a year and a half. A year and a half. I came to find out that detective who charged me also had a complaint of racial profiling against him made by an African-American woman. My lawyer and I wanted to meet with him, have a sit down in person, and just explain that I had nothing to do with this. We sent him my curriculum vitae, which outlined everything I had done professionally. He wouldn't meet. And instead, he pressed on with the case. And it took a year and a half for a court to find me factually innocent. And the worst part of that is my family had to spend thousands of dollars to fight the case, because we had to we got another attorney who was a little bit more high powered. And that could have been just incredibly awful for me, because as a teacher, there was a time when I applied for a job at a different school. Yeah. And I don't know of any school that's going to hire anybody with a criminal record to work with children. So that could have really put a big dent in my career. And and the only tie to this whole thing was, and this is the real irony, was that the suspect allegedly committed this crime while using a vehicle that I had bought an insurance policy on, that I actually was sharing for a little bit of time with a teaching colleague. And the irony is that I got I got an insurance policy, a co-insurance policy on that particular car, so that if I were ever stopped by the police, that they wouldn't think that I stole the car. So even when I was going to that length to demonstrate that kind of innocence, that racial profiling, I still got caught up in racial profiling. And, now the focus today is on brutality. And fortunately, I've never experienced an assault by a police officer. So my body was not assaulted, but my character certainly was.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like if I don't go down one way, or if black men in this country don't go down one way at the hands of the police, they're going to go down another way. And it all stems from that inherent unconscious bias. And for that detective to have weaponized the police against me, I mean, that's money that my family is never going to get back. Just all that to just restore a reputation, which all points to the fact that if you're black in this country, it's almost like you have to work twice and 3 times as hard to prove your innocence, which in this case was proving a negative.
Yeah. And then who knows, mate? I think what happened, thank God that you're so passionate about Fremantle, because having an alibi that I was actually 30,000 feet in the air is a pretty good alibi. So thank God that you're up in the air.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Boy, but it didn't stop me from continuing to go back down to Australia, because I went for the 2014 and 2015 grand finals. I was there. Actually, I was fortunate enough to be there twice during the 2016 home and away season, because at that point, Mason Cox, it looked like, was about to make his debut.
Yeah.
And it coincided with my school's spring vacation. So I was really fortunate. But the most fun of all, I have to admit, maybe right up there with Fremantle's grand final, was that I got to take my wife to her first Swans match. And that was 2016. I was doing a little promotion for my book in Sydney, and it just so happened that the Swans were at home against the Western Bulldogs. And when we walked through the gates at the SCG, she cried. She cried tears of joy. And then later she kind of cried tears of pain, because Jason Johannesson, his set shot from 55 meters out, won that match. And it turned out, of course, to be the grand final preview that year.
Yeah, that win actually really did set them on their way that year. It was I don't know why, I still remember that game. It actually rained, and I'm sure you would have got pretty wet that day, I think.
Yeah, we were actually in Sydney. We were up high underneath the roof. But it was a beautiful night, and I never knew. I'd been to the SCG a couple of times before, and I never knew from that height you can actually see the Sydney skyline from up there. And it's a beautiful ground anyway. So yeah, that was a real thrill to do that, and for her to experience that. And here's another thing, Corey, that we were talking about. Another thing that's unusual about Aussie rules. At that point, we went on the ground and had a kick, which you don't really see that in Major League Baseball. Sometimes the teams allow kids to run the bases, but they do that with everybody off the field, and long after the players have gone in and everything like that. But that's just such a great moment in Aussie rules, where children and their parents run down, and footies are flying every which way. And I should tell you that I actually did kick a goal in Subi when I was playing kick to kick after the win over Collingwood.
Yeah, the only thing is, mate, kick to kick can get very dangerous. You learn this new awareness about where balls are going during kick to kick. You see a lot of people get hit in the head with balls that they don't know are coming.
No doubt. The skill that was hardest for me to learn, though? The hardest skill that I had to learn was bouncing. That took me a year and a half to learn how to do. I'm not kidding you. And I was really lucky, because in LA, I have a good mate who used to play for Collingwood. He was a backman. And he got 5 games, and he was an emergency for the 1990 grand final, Andrew Tarpey. And he was a neighbor of mine. And I just happened to meet him casually at this cafe, and he saw me wearing my Frio jumper. And he's like, "Oi, Fremantle." And so I go over to him. We started talking. I was like, "Who's your club?" I sort of puffed my chest out. And he said, "I used to play." And I'm like, "For who?" And he's like, "Collingwood." And I think I won him over because I sang the club song, Collingwood's club song at that point. And he kind of knew that I knew what I was talking about. So we used to go down to a local park, and we used to play kick to kick like 2 or 3 times a week. So I'm a pretty decent kick. It's all in the drop, as I learned.
It is all in the drop. This episode is brought to you by National Make Good Solutions, experts in taking your commercial property back to the day it was built at the end of your lease. Now, obviously hasn't been the greatest week of all time. Like, what were your initial thoughts when you first watched the footage of George Floyd? Like, I know that, look, every person that saw it around the world are just disgusted by seeing something like that. But how does it make you feel where you see something like that once more?
The first thing that I thought was, this could have been me, could have been my father, could have been any number of friends or male relatives. It also, Corey, I was looking at my own face. I caught a glimpse of my own face when I was looking at this on my laptop, and I did not recognize the face that I saw looking back at me, because I had such a look of anger and intense, I don't even know what the word is, but I don't think I've ever been that angry. And also the fact that it's not surprising that this stuff happens. And one of the things that I wrote about for both the Detroit Free Press and the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age is the look on that officer's face. This look of arrogance, this look of superiority. And it is the look of white supremacy, the look of racism that I have seen with my own eyes. And many of us have seen with our own eyes at one point or another in our lives, that this is a look that says you're inferior. You have no right to question my authority. I'm going to keep you in your place, and I can take your life if I so choose. And that was the thing that it just had me seething. And, I'll let you in on something, Corey, too, because today there was a hearing in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, the black jogger from Georgia. And I used to live in Georgia. And you get out of the cities and you get out in the country, and there are a lot of Confederate flags that you see on bumper stickers of cars and houses and everything. And personally, I think it should be treated as the Nazi flag is, because that to us means the same thing as it does to Jewish people, to Roma, to LGBTQ people that the Nazis were after. Because I read in that story today about Ahmaud Arbery, about how his assailants, the vigilantes that murdered him, his executioners, that they used racial slurs on him. They hit him with their car, and that car had that Confederate flag logo. And at that point, Corey, I was reading it and I broke down in tears. And I was, if you think about the hurt, if you think about the post-traumatic stress disorder and that historical trauma, I had internalized it really well for 10 days. Because as a teacher, it's a public position. And I have to have my public persona when I teach my kids. I have to hold it together for them. Mm. But I fell to the ground and I was shaking with tears. And it was the first time that I had ever, physically and viscerally, I had let it out. And I'll tell you, for the last 10 days, I have had massive headaches. I haven't been able to sleep. And there are so many things that are going through my mind right now. So today was kind of a breaking point. And also, I should say, too, it's caused me to lash out in ways that I really don't like toward the closest people to me. And I think it's one of the stages of grief that people go through. So I don't excuse myself for that, but it's a real trauma. And it's hard to explain to people. And I think, and this is where I really think that my Indigenous friends in Australia, my Black fellow friends, can really understand this, because they also carry historical trauma that maybe they didn't experience something personally in their lives, but their ancestors did. And that's something that I really totally can understand. And with my Indigenous friends, there's something else that they feel that I really can't, which really speaks to the slave experience. Because, if you know any Aboriginal people, they always talk about their spiritual connection with the land. That is something I will never, ever really be able to feel, because America is not our native land. The fact that we were forced here, we didn't have a choice in the matter. So no matter where I go, as long as I live in America, I'm not going to feel that same spiritual connection to the land, because it doesn't run through my cultural DNA the way it would with someone who is a Torres Strait Islander or an Indigenous Australian. So that's a really powerful thing too.
Is that the biggest thing probably moving forward? Is just people understanding it. I think that you hit it on the head there, that people understanding how you actually feel. Like sometimes it's not going to be direct actions, or we've had some horrible actions, but I think you hit it on the head that if that's how that makes you feel, people have to understand that. It doesn't matter whatever other opinion is. If people feel that way, well, then people have to respect it and more to the point, understand it.
Absolutely. And I think that with the movement, with the Black Lives Matter movement, and still getting the question, well, don't all lives matter? Well, of course they do. But let's just say, for example, Corey, if you hadn't eaten in 2 weeks and you come over to my house and you say, hey, mate, I am so hungry. And if I look back at you and say, well, hey, everybody's hungry, how would that make you feel? It would make you feel like I have no empathy for your situation, that I'm disregarding what you're trying to tell me. If you hurt your leg in a match and I'm playing alongside you and you're saying, oh man, I think I did my hammy. And I'm like, well, what about my hammy? And I'm perfectly fine. If I go to the financial district in San Francisco and I run into a homeless man who is malnourished, and he says, brother, I'm really hungry. And I say, well, hey, what about me? I'm hungry too. And then I go home to my house and I have a full refrigerator, freezer, and pantry. because at that point I have an advantage that he doesn't have. So it's never been saying that Black Lives Matter more. It's saying, look, our lives do matter and we hurt. Because I also remember Michael Brown, an 18-year-old kid in Ferguson, Missouri, back in 2014. He was shot dead by police. And the police let his body stay face down on the street for hours, as if that body had no dignity, as if that person had no one who loved him or cared for him. It would be like this. It would be, I mean, that's what happens with roadkill. I mean, out in the bush, if a kangaroo is hit by a car, then that corpse is going to be out there in the road for days and no one thinks to take it away and or bury it or do something with it. And that was the level that those officers treated Michael Brown, a human being. And I've said this before to kids about when I teach world history, that the first thing that archaeologists say when they recognize when there was a civilization was when humans buried their dead. And here's Michael Brown's corpse rotting in the street for hours. And that to us made us think our lives don't matter. We're still being treated as if our lives don't matter. So that's when that movement started, when we asserted ourselves and said Black Lives Matter. And then to be faced with some people derisively saying that meant that was Black supremacy. I've heard people say that Black Lives Matter movement is a terrorist movement. You know, and the other thing I didn't mention too earlier was the knee on the neck. The knee on the neck from that officer, that was so symbolic of our experience, because we have felt like our necks, that knee has been white supremacy and has been institutional racism that has grounded us down for 401 years since we've been here. And anytime we've tried to make progress or make a movement, that knee still remains on our neck. I mean, if you think about President Barack Obama, when he came into office and you had his unworthy successor, who I won't even mention, his unworthy successor before he got to the presidency, for years led that birther movement to say that he was unqualified because of a lie, saying that he wasn't born in the United States. So here we have our first president who is African American. And what's the reaction? That somebody who is a white supremacist is saying that he's unqualified, saying that he's ineligible, and tries to delegitimize his presidency. And then people in the Republican Party tried to obstruct every political move he tried to make, tried to undermine him at every turn. I remember he hadn't even been on the job for an hour. And the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, said, we're going to make him a one-term president. Didn't even give him a chance. And thank goodness that didn't happen, that he served 2 terms. But, you know, I also think of a sporting hero of mine, Jackie Robinson, who you may be familiar with. Jackie Robinson was the first African-American major leaguer, along with Larry Doby, in 1947 to integrate Major League Baseball. And Jackie Robinson had to be on his best behavior. He had to be calm. He had to be cool. He had to be level-headed. He couldn't react, and he couldn't resist all the racism that came from the stands. And Jackie Robinson ended up dying at an early age. So Barack Obama had to be the Jackie Robinson of African-American presidents, because privately, you know, brothers and I were like, you know, he is pissed with all the stuff that's going on, but he could never show it, because if he did, that would play into the whole demonization, this angry Black man stereotype. And he conducted himself with such grace and such dignity and such poise that he will always be a huge hero to us. And the other thing that I loved about him and his candidacy was that I didn't vote for him because he was African American, because there had been other African American candidates that ran. I love the fact that he was the only senator that opposed the Iraq War. You know, I totally did not support the Iraq War. I love the fact that he was progressive on things like climate change, and that he wanted healthcare reform and wanted to help the common person. The fact to me that he was African American was a nice bonus. That here's somebody who looks like me. And actually, it's funny, his daughters attended the high school that I went to in Washington, D.C. when I was growing up. So all of that was going on. And even that about the Black support for Barack Obama, because some people thought they're only voting for him because he's Black. Well, no one ever asks white voters why they're voting for white candidates. No one ever says, well, you must be voting for this one or that one because they're white. So that's the double standard that we deal with.
And the one that I think out of all this that nearly seems a bit vindicated in it is Colin Kaepernick now. Like, I think for the reason, if everyone understood the reason why he was actually kneeling in the first place, had nothing to do with the national anthem. It was, in terms of him wanting to make a stand for the actual topic that we're actually talking about.
Absolutely. And the thing is that's so ironic now is you had the comments that Drew Brees made yesterday. And,
which I was gonna get to that. And then you got, someone like Drew Brees who, to be brutally honest, you'd actually expect a lot more from someone like Drew Brees, and he's standing in the game, never mind where he actually lives. Like, he lives in Louisiana, right. He's in New Orleans, and to make the comments that he did. Now, I know he's subsequently today he's come out and apologised, but again, just a crazy comment.
It is, and you know what? I hope he doesn't have too many brothers on his offensive line.
Because he's in trouble on that first snap of the season. No.
Yeah, I stopped watching the NFL years ago, but I can't imagine the pass protection is going to be there for him. That was really it was just a bewilderingly stupid comment to make, and the timing couldn't have been worse. I mean, the least he could have said if he really believed it was, I have an issue about maybe the time of the protest, but I understand the sentiment. And, Colin Kaepernick to me is a hero. I mean, it's ironic to say, but he took a stand by taking a knee. And actually, I took a knee too. I mean, I'm an assistant baseball coach at my high school. And last year we had a playoff game. And I told our senior coach beforehand, and I just said, I hope you know that when we line up along the field for our playoff game, and if they play the anthem, I'm going to take a knee. And I said, I won't try and convince anyone else to do it. If they follow me, that's fine. But I just want you to know where I stand. Well, where I stand. So anyway, and we were in this small Northern California town. I didn't know what the reaction was going to be, but I took a knee. And I felt very good about doing that. And I also did the same thing at the USAFL grand final that I was a boundary rider on in 2018, I guess it was. And so, I made my choice, and I just thought to myself, whatever flack I get, whatever comments I get, I'm just going to have to take it, and I'll take responsibility. And no one said anything to me, but in my heart, I knew that I had done the right thing. And if anyone saw, then I'm happy that they did. So what Colin Kaepernick did really did inspire me. And by the way, I don't know if a lot of your viewers and listeners know this, but in 1968, with the two track stars on the Olympic team, well, you know what? The third man was an Australian, Peter Norman.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. I think he'd only just passed away last year.
That's right. And John Carlos and Tommy Smith were two of his pallbearers. And, Peter Norman became a hero in the African-American community. And he's the only Australian immortalized in bronze at the National Museum of African-American History and Culture in Washington, because there's a statue of the three of them. And so that is something that we feel very proud of, or I know I do, that we have an Australian ally that was standing with us and really had his heart in the right place. And, so that was something that was really meaningful.
Now, just say 5 years from now, Fremantle and North Melbourne are in the grand final, and you and I are having a beer at the grand final.
Right.
What is the America that you really want to see out of this? Like, we've obviously got the reaction now, and we've still got some protests, and the protests subside, and what is it in 5 years' time that is meaningful change that we've actually moved forward? The entire world, but more specifically America.
Yeah, I think that you have to put in some very serious police reforms. I think to not classify the Fraternal Order of Police as an actual union, because they've been running like a mafia for years, and this whole culture of the thin blue line, that absolutely has to change. The other thing that has to change is in arresting tactics, that there are certain physical things that should not be used.
Yeah.
I would also think police do not need to have guns. There's got to be something, a taser, something like that, that would momentarily stun somebody. I think that's something, but I also think it has to go hand in hand with gun reform, because there are too many guns on the streets in the United States. And I love what Australia has done. When there was that massacre in Tasmania, that very shortly after that, those weapons were banned. Now, granted, I'm sure that there are some guns on the black market out there and people have access to them, but you have to really start with America's gun culture. And I think it also goes with the police totally. You know, we talk about this with AFL clubs, that there has to be a change in culture. There has to be a change in this view, it's us against them. That has to change. You know, there's one of the things that's being spray painted in some of these protests is the acronym ACAB, all cops are bastards. And I even told my kids today in class, I don't believe that, because that's equally bad as someone saying all black men are thugs. And I never want to go there. I know some good cops. I've worked with some good cops as a member of the media. But when you see footage of people acting the way they are in these protests, and still as if they've learned nothing, to still be putting knees on necks, to still be doing chokeholds, to still be shooting first and asking questions later, and slamming people down, and to have this so-called president of this country militarize the police and form in front of the White House and go on the offensive against peaceful protesters, all so he could get a photo op holding a Bible he's never read, is just absolutely absurd. And I mentioned the militarization of the police. That's got to stop. I mean, the police have been using military weaponry, toys, as it looks like, whether it be vehicles, weapons, all of that stuff, uniforms. That has to stop because they look like a paramilitary force. I saw some vision the other day of cops rolling into a neighborhood in the Twin Cities, and it looked like an invading, occupying army. And that has absolutely got to change. But the one thing, Corey, that's really hard is that no matter what kind of body cameras you have, no matter what civilian complaint review boards you have, the thing that has to change is the mindset and that unconscious bias against men of color. That has to change. There has to be such a fundamental change in that to bring that about. It has to, because, you know, I want to be able to turn to a police officer if I need help. The Minnesota governor said it really well. He wants to have a community, a society where people are not running from the police, that they're running to the police. And it's very interesting today because we've been in shelter in place. A lot of the books that I need to teach my kids next year are at school. And I've got a code that I can use on a box outside that will allow me access anytime into the building. And I was talking to the receptionist that runs that part of the front desk, and I asked her about when I could come in. And as soon as she told me that there was some graffiti that was sprayed on a gym that the school is building, and that person had been caught on camera, I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go during the daytime when other people are there, because the reason for that is if I went at night, I know that I would be a target. That somebody, if I wore this jumper with a hood and I'm going anywhere near where that gym is, where there's the graffiti, well, guess who's going to be a suspect then? And guess who might get pounced on and have this whole experience that I had before. So I'm going to go during the day and keep social distance and go get my books, because it affects us in so many ways. There's a great video that just came out, and it's called Difficult Conversations with a Black Man. And this man, whose name is Emmanuel, who's a professional athlete, talks about how every move he makes when he steps outside the door has got to be carefully calculated and coordinated. It's the same thing that I feel. When I walk out the house at night to walk the dog, I have a certain route that I take. You know, when I come back toward my apartment complex, I have my keys out, lest anybody see me who's racist and might use their white privilege to use the phone and call me and say, there's a black intruder at my door. No, I want them, you know, and I shouldn't have to do this, but I want them to see my key and my key fob that I'm using to get into the building, right? And because this has happened to me too a couple of times when I visited my mother in different apartment complexes, once in New Jersey and once in Washington, I did have people threaten to call the authorities because they didn't believe that someone who looks like me could be living in their community. And that's humiliating. That is, I mean, I'm visiting my mother, for God's sake. And one woman who actually, and this hurt even more because the woman who accused me or wanted me to be checked out was a woman of color. And I was at the reception desk, and as if I wasn't even there, she talks to the security guard, who happens to be from sub-Saharan Africa. And she says to him, "It's a good thing you're checking all these people who come in." And I look at her and I say, "I want you to take a real good look at me. What is it about my person that makes you think I don't belong here or couldn't possibly live here or have a family member who lives here?" And she had no answer for that, because I didn't fit in her preconceived box of what she thought a black man could be.
Yeah. We've got about 10 minutes to go, but what are the things this week that have actually given you a little bit more hope than usual? Like, I know you mentioned that not all cops are bad. Like, I know some of the footage I'd seen, I think it was maybe in Flint, Michigan, I think it was. Like, even when you saw the police chief there walking with people, and little different things that we haven't really seen before. I know there's still some bad, but there are hopefully some green shoots.
I hope so too, because when I saw that video of Chris Swanson, I wanted to go give him a big hug. I spend time in Michigan every summer to see my mother, so I know the state pretty well.
Yeah.
And I could not believe what I saw. And, and that I did have a little cry about that, cry of joy, seeing that there is someone who understands, someone that all we're asking for is to be treated like human beings and to be treated with dignity and respect, and to see that march. The other cop that I really want to shout out is Art Acevedo, who is Latinx, who is the police chief in Houston. And he very passionately made this speech about, he understands what it's like to be a man of color and to be stereotyped and to be told that he won't amount to anything by the racist power structure, but he was out there with the people. I love seeing that. So those are glimmers of hope. The other really big glimmer of hope for me is, if you had told me a couple of weeks ago that there would be a massive demonstration in Finland of Finnish people with signs that say Black Lives Matter, I never possibly would have imagined that. I never would have. I mean, that's just beyond my comprehension. And to see people come out from around the world, Finland, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Germany, all of these, Argentina, all of these places, some of which I've been to, that is tremendous. And seeing so many whites who want to be allies, because, the whole thing is, I have never blamed a white person for what has happened to us. What I blame is the system that was set up so many years ago that was based on white supremacy, that established white privilege, and that brings me to something else. I've been to Australia now 12 times in 21 years. I've been to every state. There's very little of Australia that I haven't seen. And I've made all kinds of friends there, white fellas, black fellas, people of Asian background, people of African background, you name it, I've met them. And these, it's just funny because there was also that cartoon that was in the Sydney Morning Herald that I wrote a very lengthy response to and hope to publish. That one cartoonist's really grotesque depiction of a black man as a thug with his knee on the Statue of Liberty, his views do not represent the views of white Australians that I know. When I've gone to Australia, Corey, I've been treated like royalty. I've been treated like a member of the family. So much to the point that I really am seriously considering emigrating there one day. I would love to be an Aussie. I love the people. I love the culture. I love the land. I love it. It's like my second home. When I think I was telling you this in a conversation we had before, when I get out at Southern Cross Station in Melbourne and I'm looking out over the trains, I feel like I'm home. When I'm in Western Australia and in Fremantle and I'm walking down the Cappuccino Strip and I'm feeling that cold winter breeze, I feel like I'm home. And, that action, that cartoon, to me, it's saying, these are not the white Australians. These are not the white fellas that I know. And because the people that I do know are trying to make a change. They're trying to work on reconciliation. They're trying to bridge the gap. They're trying to educate themselves about things that they don't know. They really want to do something. And that's meaningful. And the other difference is, that's very interesting, between Australia and the United States. And granted, this action did not solve everything, far from it. But the leader of your country said sorry. Kevin Rudd said sorry. No American president has ever said that to us, has never apologized for all the things that we have collectively endured. And at least with Kevin Rudd, that was a start. And I still see vision for that. You know, I didn't tell you this, but I also teach Australian history in class because I teach a Pacific Rim cultural studies class. And I play that moment, the newscast where Kevin Rudd says sorry, and the reaction from Australians from all walks of life and what that meant. It started the reconciliation process, right? And the other way I teach that history is I refuse to teach it to say that Australian history started with Captain Cook. The first thing that I do with those kids that I teach, the first thing they have to do is learn about the Jerkba. They learn about the Dreamtime. I make them reenact Dreamtime stories. I teach them about the spiritual history of the indigenous people. They have to know who Jandamara is, and Pemulwuy, and Truganini, and Yagan, and Windradine. They have to know who all those people are, in addition to Cook and Arthur Phillip and Batman and all those folks. They have to know it, because Australian history, of course, did not start with the British coming there. It's got a history that's 80,000 years old. It's the oldest continuing culture in the world. And it's my responsibility to teach them so they get the full and accurate and true picture. So, yeah.
No, I think everyone can tell that if you ever decide to move to Australia, as he has another swig of his beer, I think you're more than going to fit in pretty well. I think one thing Australians love, that when anyone comes and embraces an Australian way of life, and when I say that, it's, you know, I mean, you're buying into everything that's Australian, from your attitude towards life and the footy and all the culture and everything that goes with it. I think anyone that makes an effort with that, Australians love it. But when someone like yourself that, you know, I mean, you're pretty more than super passionate about your footy team, well, that just takes you to another level. Now, one thing before I wrap up, I did see there's a little line in here that says, it makes mention saying Dean Cox was meant to be the first trailblazer of the big guys. Now, I don't know whether you know, there was a bloke in 1996 that won the AFL MVP, that he might have been the first trailblazer first.
And he should have won the Brownlow.
He did win the MVP, though, which I don't know whether some of those other guys did.
But the AFL's got to kill that rule. They got to get rid of that rule. If you're suspended, you can't win the Brownlow. They have to get rid of that. They really need to get rid of that. And so yeah, and Dean got. I saw that he was inducted into the AFL.
Did, yes.
I'm wait. When are you going to get your call? You should get that call too.
Still waiting, mate. Still waiting.
Okay. Hey, I will be your publicist. I will lead that effort, because you should get that. Because I mean, I'm looking at your grand final. 29 possessions. What ruckman do you know of gets 29 possessions in the match?
I don't know, Gil. I don't know. Like, and Norm Smith, hello? Don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that is ridiculous. Now, I know that Shannon Grant won it in 99, and that was the first grand final that I ever watched live. I didn't see 96, but I did a little homework. And because when you were in your peak, that was just before my footy time. But I did see vision of your goal against Sydney when you rucked your own hit, when you roved your own hit out. And on the run from how many meters? Was that like what? How many meters out?
I reckon it was at least 80 meters out. Like it was. Yeah.
That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. No ruckman does that. I'm sorry. I've never ever seen that before. And when I watched it, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that, because I think about the ruckman that I've watched. You know, Big Sandy. Big Sandy would be the ruckman that I really have watched the most.
Yeah.
And I think watching what you were doing and what Dean Cox was doing and Nick Natanui does now, that's as Bruce McAvaney says, that's special. That is special to be able to do something like that. And I think that I mean, when you see 29 possessions, I mean, that's what a midfielder does. That's an inside mid grabbing all those possessions and doing all that stuff. And it's incredible to see that. So when Mason Cox does things like playing up forward a lot of the time now, and when he's kicking goals, I love to see that. Fremantle, we have Rory Lobb, who I love seeing doing those things where he's up forward and he's a marking target, and he's been sensational for us. But to have that skill set of hunting the ball and being mobile, that's incredible. It really is. So my hat's off to you, because not only did you win 2 premierships, but then you went on and got a best and fairest at another club I mean, not many people have that, because that's another difference, because a lot of times AFL guys are mostly one club players. And I'm so used to American sport people playing for many different clubs. So, yeah, I mean, that's sensational that you were able to do all of that. Did you play basketball before you went into footy?
No, I stayed away from basketball. I was more into my golf. So yeah, no, I was always a golfer that eventually ended up playing footy. I only stuck at footy because I was good at it. Golf was always my first love. So
Really? Okay. Now, what about Sean? Your brother Sean, did he ever play basketball?
no, he was always footy all the way through. So yeah, hopefully Sean. I mean, they'll be, well, this time next week, round one kicks around, and Fremantle got round one.
We got Brisbane.
Oh, that's right.
And Brisbane are tough. Brisbane, they're a really, really tough club. And, of course, we know Lachie Neale really well. I mean, Brisbane had a fantastic season last year. Charlie Cameron, he's always dangerous. And I've never seen an AFL club really go after a lot of players in the trade market and free agent market and have it all go well. So that's a tribute to Chris Fagan. He's a sensational senior coach to make all of that work, because with Fremantle too, I mean, of course, I've seen us have really big trading periods and big drafts and everything, but never to have that kind of success the way that Fags has put it together. I mean, think about it. It took Richmond twice to knock them out of contention. And boy, Richmond, they were just on a mission last year. And it's interesting because Richmond of last year are kind of up with the best footy team I've ever seen play. And I don't know if you agree with this, but the best footy club I have ever seen in a single season had to have been Essendon in 2000. I mean, you talk about a juggernaut.
They beat us by 20 goals in the final. So
yeah, they beat everybody. Was that the one when Matthew Lloyd kicked his 100th of the season?
Yeah, he did. It was just another day that you talk about not remembering the grand final. Well, I've sort of forgotten about that day.
Well, here's the crazy thing for me, because in that Essendon season, I remember where my wife and I were in the only match they lost, because they lost to Western Bulldogs. And they lost late in the match because someone kicked out on the full. And I remember my wife and I were in a car. We were in a rental car in Tasmania. We had just gone to Port Arthur, and we were driving back to Hobart. And I just remember that, wow, they're actually going to lose a match this year, because I really thought that they were going to go undefeated. And I remember at the grand final, we went to the grand final that year when they beat North Melbourne. And I'm sorry, not North Melbourne. Sorry, Melbourne, when they beat the Demons. And I remember talking to Kevin Sheedy at the grand final parade. And first he was stunned to hear a question from an American reporter with an American accent. But I was asking him about how he felt about that, the fact that this could have been the only undefeated club. And he said it wouldn't take the tarnish off what they've accomplished. But when I say undefeated, I also now have to mention that I'm equally passionate about our girls, our AFLW club. And I was really disappointed that the season was canceled, because they didn't get their shot at the premiership. So that really just makes me even more fired up for 2021, that there's some unfinished business there. And those girls were incredible. And in baseball, as you know, the coaches wear the same kit as the players do. So that's no different in high school. So I'm an assistant coach. So I purposely picked number 27 to honor Gemma Houghton, who's an incredible player. And it's great to see AFLW come so far, because when I teach the kids about Aussie history, I do have one entire class that I devote to footy. And so I show them an AFL Explained video for the men. And now finally, I've got something for my girls. There's a really great documentary on the Adelaide Crows Women's Club's first season that I show. Yeah. And get this, I even had a girl in my class. I have this exercise where they can write in the voice of an Australian. It can be really of anybody. And she chose Erin Phillips. So Erin, if you're listening out there, you've got a fan who is an American girl who plays soccer. And after I introduced you to her, she was so inspired by you that she wrote an essay in your voice. That's the kind of impact I want to create over here, where people really get into the game. And there are a few thousand of us who play it. as part of the United States Australian Football League, the USAFL, and they do a wonderful job of promoting the game. But I would love to see that, that people over here really embrace the game.
Yeah. Well, look, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I think everyone in Australia is actually blown away by your knowledge of the game, the ins and all the intricacies about AFL football that you know back to front. I think you're going to get many supporters. Anyone that rolls up to a meeting with an Australian that's got a beer and I haven't, I was pretty jealous. That what beer was it? What was your weapon of choice for your beer?
Weapon of choice tonight is Lil Something Something, which is an IPA that is made by the Lagunitas Brewing Company. But, with social distancing and with we're under a curfew too. So I couldn't go down to a nearby Burlingame down south and get Cooper's Ale because that's well,
you're not missing much by drinking Cooper's Ale, by the way. So you can have your Cooper's Ale. We might have to, next time you're in Australia, we might have to have a Carlton Draft or a Great Northern or one of those beers. It's actually a normal type beer. But no, look, it's been an absolute privilege and an honour to talk to you. Like I said, your knowledge about football is fantastic, and even your thoughts in what's been a difficult week. Let's hope everyone's learnt some massive lessons out of this week, and we can, like I said, I think our dream scenario, if you talk about I have a dream, Martin Luther King.
Yes.
I think our ultimate dream is that you and I are at the grand final in about 5 years' time. We're having a beer, we're drinking a Carlton Draft. Yeah. And we're looking back and saying, look, in 2020, for everything that happened, wasn't it great that everything was able to change?
Well, there's only one better thing than that. First of all, I'm going to take you up on that beer because I carry this in my wallet.
You got your Mikey pass.
I got my Mikey card because I know I'm going to be back. That's what Australia means to me, that I know that I will be back. So I've always got this at the ready. And, the only other thing to the dream is that Freo win on a kick after the siren. And I will cry my eyes out because I bleed purple. And that will be one of the only next to my wedding day will that be the happiest day of my life.
I think even I maybe cop a lot of grief from North Melbourne supporters, but if you got someone like yourself that's passionate about the game, and I don't think that anyone lay to having any more passion, I know the Fremantle Footy Club would just be, they think it's absolutely fantastic to have a voice overseas and someone that's pushing the game. So it's been, like I said, it's been awesome to have a chat. And for everyone out there, you can catch it on the YouTube channel, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
All right. Cheers, mate.